Hello, everyone. I'm here with Art Stapleton, who covers the Giants. We are diving into our second one of these podcasts for the year. Just talking to the beat writers, getting you guys some information. Like I said, Art here works for the Giants. Art, how are we doing today?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. For those of you that don't know, you can find Art on Twitter at Art_Stapleton. And then Art also has a fantastic podcast, All In with Art Stapleton. Be sure to check that out. We're in an exciting time. We're about to dive into another week of OTAs here. Something that we talked about a little bit before we hopped on here. I thought it'd be really cool to just kind of give people an idea of, we're in late May. OTAs are still early on, but what kind of things are we expecting to see from these OTAs? What can we expect from rookies? What are we expecting to see from veterans? Just this time of year as a generality.
It's funny because this has changed over time. I started on the Giants beat as part of our coverage team back in 2009, and we kind of flip-flopped in NFL, between the Jets and the Giants being in this area, and then really full-time on the beat since 2011. And if you know the Giants, they've been through a lot of regime change since then. Tom Coughlin and Ben McAdoo and Pat Shurmur and Joe Judge, and now Brian Daboll. And every coach kind of tweaks the approach. But the difference between the phases of the offseason and now when we get into OTAs is that for the first time, you're allowed to have offense against defense on the field. And it may sound like something so simplistic, but for the first two phases of the offseason, once they get on the field, it has to be offense against offense. So you're not matching up a wide receiver like a Malik Nabers against a Paulson Daboll, who the Giants brought in to be their cornerback one, until you get into 7-on-7 and you could actually have offense against defense. But I've learned through the years, and I sound like, I don't want it to be a get off my lawn kind of thing, but everybody approaches OTAs a little differently in terms of coverage, and you try to start charting passes and who's completing what, who got beat, who scored a touchdown. There's a really loose way to kind of cover it. I think the biggest thing is that for the first time for the Giants, you're going to see Abdul Carter on the same field as Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence, and Kayvon Thibodeau, whereas Carter lining up, you're going to see a lot of that. The idea of, is he going to be a strict edge rusher? Is he playing a little off the ball? But those are the kind of things that you're watching for during OTAs. The offensive line and the defensive line, it's not live contact. So when those guys don't have pads on, you're not really getting much out of the offensive and defensive lines per se. But, look, it's fun. And we get to hear from these guys. So it's kind of dictated. Unfortunately, it's not an open locker room setting. So it's really dictated by the team and who they put at the podium. Yes, we can put in requests to talk to certain guys. We usually get 3 or 4 guys a day. That kind of generates a lot of the interest and things that the team wants out there for people to talk. So it's a fine line. I mean, you try to come up with some different storylines, try to give an overview. But for the Giants, there's some clear players as far as who are going to garner a lot of the attention, and I'm sure we'll get into that over the next couple of minutes.
Yeah, no, I think you almost segued too perfectly, right? I think obviously the biggest thing with the Giants this year is the quarterback position, right? There's more optimism over previous seasons. The addition of Russell Westbrook. Oh my gosh, Russell Wilson, Jameis Winston, and then obviously drafting Jaxson Dart in the first round. We've seen, or I've seen reports, everything from if the Giants don't perform well early with Wilson, Dart comes in early. I've seen reports where Jameis is there because they want to shift to him and let Dart sit potentially all year. I mean, what do you realistically think the ideal plan is for Jaxson Dart in year one? But then what do you actually think the reality could be?
I think there's a lot of guessing going on right now, and they're trying to compare and contrast. And, you heard a lot right around the draft with Brian Daboll and Joe Shane, who were there when Josh Allen was drafted 7th overall in Buffalo. The idea of, You look at who was there. It was a Nathan Peterman, in Buffalo, who ended up winning the job. That's a lot different than Russell Wilson taking over. Now we can sit here and debate what Russell has left, but Jaxson Dart is not coming here to hold the clipboard and to sit around and watch and learn. I mean, he's a confident kid. I mean, we've heard that. Brian Daboll is going to be putting a lot of effort and energy into getting him up to speed and ready to go. But look, the offseason, and then once you get into the regular season, there's even less time to truly put a quarterback on task during practice. And so that's why these next couple months are very important for Jaxson Dart, is that, Russell Wilson is going to get the first team reps and whatever first team reps there are to have. But this contract situation is important, is that Russell Wilson, even though he's making $10 million with incentives that are based on playing time and production, and that's the same for Jameis, Russell's on a one-year deal. Jameis Winston, even though people want to kind of shift to that and say, well, I've seen they should trade him, because now they have Jaxson Dart. He's under contract for an economical price for 2 years. So I think when they laid out these contracts, they were always looking ahead to the draft and said, when we get our guy, Jameis will be the backup for next year and this year. And then we'll see what happens with Russell and then move forward from there. So to answer your question, and again, we can get more into it, but just the idea, yes, Russell Wilson will be the starter. Yes, Jameis Winston is sitting here as the number 2. But how quickly the Giants can get Jaxson Dart up to speed, and they'll know, right? What do we say? Ball don't lie. I mean, the players in the locker room will know if Jaxson Dart can do the job, and if Russell Wilson gets off to a slow start, well, then they may shift to Jaxson Dart, because this is a coaching staff. Brian Daboll needs Jaxson Dart to play well. I don't know if you saw the viral video that somehow was captured behind the scenes, and I still don't know where it came from. And I'm not talking about the Giants' life, but it was Brian Daboll on the phone with Jaxson Dart after he drafted him on draft night. And they were kind of going back and forth a little bit, and it was Daboll's way to kind of welcome Dart into the fold. And he said, the last thing he said is, I'm counting on you. I'm banking on you. And Dart said, I know, good decision. But that's the reality. I mean, Brian Daboll needs Jaxson Dart to play well. And there will be that give and take of when is he ready, but also when is he ready to make the team look good for drafting him. And I think that's always going to be an issue as far as, if the team gets off to a slow start, they're not going to force Jaxson Dart into the mix if they don't think he can perform, because just putting Jaxson Dart on the field doesn't necessarily make them look good. Jaxson Dart has to be ready to perform and show some promise. We're not talking about winning games and throwing for 300 yards, but if he goes out there and flops, then all of a sudden you can't use that card of, well, we have to keep Daboll here because he's developing Jaxson Dart. So it's a dance here that the Giants are going to have to do with their quarterbacks. And it's going to be fascinating to see how they work the timelines into the mix. But yeah, Russell Wilson is the number 1. He's the number 1 for as long as he performs. And then we'll see what happens after that.
No, it's an interesting take. And it's funny, you referencing that Winston contract, that makes perfect sense. And I think it's just interesting. So we talked to Nick Farbo of about the Steelers, and he actually mentioned, maybe the Steelers, if Aaron Rodgers falls through, they go after someone like Winston. But to your point, it seems like the structure of those contracts almost makes Winston the 2-year safety net, which is very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of it. And everybody here in New York and New Jersey, obviously, Tommy DeVito is the forgotten guy. I mean, he's won more games for the Giants at quarterback than any guy they've had in here since, Daniel Jones during the playoff year in 2022. He won 3 games 2 years ago, and it cost the Giants a chance at Jaden Daniels and Drake May. So, Tommy DeVito is number 4, so to speak. And there are a lot of people, myself included, what is Tommy DeVito's role? I mean, look, Tommy DeVito has a bigger role now over the next couple months than he may in September. And that's because he's the only quarterback who's been in this offense. He can sit down with Jaxson Dart if they develop a relationship and say, look, this is what Daboll's looking for here. This is what Kafka thinks. This is what the receivers, I can give you a scouting report on Malik Nabers and Wan'Dale Robinson and Jalen Hyatt and Darius Slayton. So DeVito has value here in the offseason, maybe even more so than Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston in terms of the development of Jaxson Dart. Because let's not forget, DeVito, as a rookie, was an undrafted guy. He didn't get first-team reps in practice until after he actually got his first start for the Giants. Because during the season – you are limited in terms of practice time. The CBA kills you in terms of, your quarterback. If you're Giants are getting ready to play Washington week 1. You can't split first team reps between Russell Wilson and Jaxson Dart. You've got to give them all to Russell Wilson. Now you look at the scout team. Now you're talking about who's going to be the scout team quarterback. Well, it's going to be Jaxson Dart. But do you really want Jaxson Dart focused on learning the plays of the Commanders, or do you want Jaxson Dart focused on learning the plays of the Giants? So that's where Jameis Winston comes into effect and say, you know what, Jameis, you're going to be Jaden Daniels this week, run the Commanders offense, and then you have Jaxson Dart likely practicing after the fact. After the game, after the practice, they'll go in and they use like their developmental periods where they'll go and they'll run all of the plays they ran with Russell Wilson. They'll now run them with Jaxson Dart, and not the first team offense, but a lot of the scout team guys, a lot of the practice guys, a lot of the rookies that he has gotten used to in practice. They'll go run those plays after the fact. And that's kind of that bonus period where, people want to know, well, what's going on in practice? NFL practices are a lot different than what you would imagine. You'd think if NFL, these teams, how many times do you hear this, Matt? If these teams want to win, they'll practice for 8 hours. Like, no, they can't do that. So even players, a lot of it is voluntary during the season. Players saying, captains practices, but the idea of captains are telling players to come in at 7:30 and start studying, and that's the way it's going to be. A lot of it is on their own. A lot of it is what are the players doing and who wants to be there. And the teams have to be very careful about putting pressure on players to kind of go beyond the CBA. So the business side of the NFL really does factor in. And then when you're talking about younger players, you can't expect a younger player to put in twice the amount of time on schedule with coaches that a veteran is not putting in. Now, does a guy want it? Can Jaxson Dart say, Dave's Friday night, I want to come to your house and I want to talk about the game plan. I mean, it can, but the reality is Brian Daboll's got to focus on winning football games. And if Jaxson Dart isn't that guy early on, how much time can he truly dedicate to the development of Jaxson Dart? So it's really an interesting dilemma when we focus on timelines, because no team is the same, and how they bring along these quarterbacks are going to be very interesting.
No, for sure. And I think this is probably one of the biggest storylines of the NFL in terms of, to your point, this QB room and how it does shake out throughout the year. Trying to transition into that, but still keeping a younger player in the fold. So obviously last year, nice surprise. Tyrone Tracey takes the lead back role, has a pretty solid season. Devin Singletary started in that role, and he's still on this team, still hanging around. They go out and they draft Cam Skattebo in the 4th. I think that excited a lot of people just from I think everyone got behind Skattebo in the, in the college kind of end of season bowl game time. They just fell in love with the kid. The Giants go out and get him. If we look at this thing full circle, what's just like the QB room, what's the realistic, or what do you think the breakdown is and how this backfield shakes out as the year progresses?
Well, I think it's important to just mention that Singletary obviously has his prior relationship with Daboll and Shane. So it's not like Team Brass all of a sudden is going to want to get Singletary out of here. But talent will overtake a lot. And I think the thing with Skattebo is, when you look at the commitment that the Giants made, I said all along, everybody was talking about how the Giants were going to look and draft a complement to Tyrone Tracey. And I kind of look at it one of two ways. I say you can say that, but you could also say that Tracey is the perfect complement to Cam Skattebo. And when you look at the Giants drafted Skattebo in the 4th round, they drafted Tracey in the 5th round. So it's not like all of a sudden Tracey is a first-round pick where, they're going to defer to him. It's the same regime that's here. So these guys are on equal footing. And I think, as much as I would say, look, from a fantasy perspective, you're probably better off going for Tracey than Skattebo. But I think with all the attention that's been given to Skattebo and the type of runner he is, it's only a small sample size. But watching him in rookie minicamp, he's a tremendous receiver out of the backfield. And what will be interesting to me is since Tyrone Tracey was a converted wide receiver, became a running back, I think there's this idea that all of a sudden, well, he's going to be a better receiving threat than Skattebo. I don't know about that. I think Skattebo is very good as a receiver. And I think that's where he's going to kind of push Tyrone Tracey, at least early on in the year, to be able to see, look, we've seen younger guys in backfields, inexperienced guys come around here and all of a sudden have an impact. The thing about Skattebo and what's hard to take it off the field and you want to put it out there is his attitude. His attitude kind of sets a different tone for the Giants. If you're, and I don't want to bring up, bad situations for you is in your fandom being from New England, but the combination of an Ahmad Bradshaw and a Brandon Jacobs and that fierceness, that idea of the running back's not going to take any crap, that's Skattebo, and he's got that fire that I think fans will gravitate to. So I don't think that Tracey, from a talent perspective, is facing that kind of competition, at least right off the bat, because I think Tracey is talented as well. But I do think that they will try to find a combination between the two of them. And I wouldn't necessarily think that by October it's going to be Tracey with Skattebo as a complement. I think you could see Skattebo with Tracey as a complement just because of who Skattebo is and what he kind of brings to the table in this offense. So it's going to be very interesting to see those two backs. From a fantasy perspective, I don't think Devin Singletary is somebody you're looking at saying he's going to be a factor, but I think they like that safety net. They like the idea that, look, you've got a third guy here that if the rookies don't, or at least the rookie and then the second-year player don't hold their end of the bargain, I think then you have Singletary here can kind of get you through a game or two on your schedule if those guys are not performing.
No, I think that's, it made me laugh, the whole Ahmad Bradshaw, Jacob scenario. I mean, that was just, you see that, just that big bruising back is coming in, and it's going to be, I'm curious to see if they end up using him more late game, especially early on in the season, if he's fresh and they do have that lead and they're just trying to grind it, right? Like, man, that just watching that kid turn out yard after yard and just it's awesome to watch, to your point. So, that sounds like it'll just be another camp basically battle that we're keeping an eye on, right?
No doubt. And I think it's important, when you look at Skattebo, he's not an imposing figure at all. If he's every bit of 5'10", that's just the way it is. But I think his attitude makes him seem like he's 6'5", and it really is. I mean, sometimes we get lost in it and guys are fiery for the wrong reasons. He's definitely an intense guy that I think players will gravitate toward, just because it's pretty genuine. It's not, let me go shout around and try to fire guys up in the pregame. He's a guy who's pretty intense throughout. So, look, how much are they going to run the ball? I think comes down to the offensive line. Can the offensive line, become a grinding unit They bring back a lot of players, but are they that, will that be their success? And with Russell Wilson, he had his success when he did in Pittsburgh with, play action. So I know, it's funny. We hear all the time, well, you don't have to run the football to be an effective play action team, but it sure helps. I mean, if teams aren't expecting you to run the football, defenses can play things a lot differently. And I think the Giants, their strength is in their weapons. And I'm sure we'll get to that in a second, but just the idea, look, Malik Nabers isn't going to get the ball, so they're not going to be sitting here focused on, Tyrone Tracey and Cam Skattebo getting the ball, 30 touches between the two of them. But if they earn it, maybe they can flip the switch against certain teams and try to lean on the run game a little bit. So it'll be interesting. But I think there will be a lot of people who look at this as it's Tracey with Skattebo as RB2. I'm not necessarily sold that by the time October rolls around, maybe even sooner, that it's not Skattebo with Tracey as RB2. And that's no disrespect to Tyrone Tracey. I just think they like Skattebo and what he brings to the table. And, again, a couple inches taller, and he's taken in the second round and not in the fourth. So I think sometimes we lose sight of what happens with some of these running backs. So I like Skattebo to really have an impact for this team this year on offense.
Rookie. It's all about rookie talk in fantasy football right now. So why not go use all that knowledge to do something other than a mock draft? Chris Jimino won $8,000 with just 2 teams last year, and each draft took 5 minutes. That's pretty good ROI. You can start doing rookie drafts for money today on Fast Draft. The Origins tournament is live. It is the place to go and monetize your knowledge of rookies and use your favorite player profiler host promo code for a $25 deposit match. Now let's go start drafting faster.
No, it sounds awesome. It sounds exciting. I think the offense in general has so much more excitement around it this year. Especially after bringing Nabers in last year, and you have the return of Slayton, who I feel like is just going to be, that guy is never leaving the Giants. I feel like, right? Like he is just, they love him for some reason.
For some reason.
I say that as lighthearted as possible. And then you obviously have Robinson, who had just an insane amount of catches for I think he averaged something extremely low yards per catch last year. But again, he was getting funneled passes. The guy that I think is there's still some hope for, and maybe this is me. I married into a UT family. I watched Jalen Hyatt on the field every time I could in Knoxville, Tennessee, and just watch those big plays. He took a step back last year, wasn't really involved at all. But I think I want to hold on to hope, and you can shoot me down right away. But, what do you think? One, does he have a chance to be a regular contributor? But more importantly, what does he have to do that he hasn't done since joining the Giants to get into a role and actually get on the field more?
Well, I think it's definitely a layered situation. Some of the blame goes to Hyatt himself, and some of the blame goes to the Giants and the quarterbacks. They played 4 quarterbacks last year, and nobody could, as much as Daboll wanted to throw the deep ball, nobody would pull the trigger on the deep ball. Now, obviously, you can factor in the offensive line in that as well. And as much as we want to talk development of Jalen Hyatt when they traded up for him in the 3rd round in the draft 2 years ago, his number one skill was the vertical game. Get vertical, hit him deep, deep overs, use his speed. And the Giants to this point have not had a quarterback who can take advantage of that. And for whatever reason, again, we can sit here and talk about all of the reasons. It's not only on the quarterback, whether it's Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, Tommy DeVito, who else has been here. But with Hyatt, you now have the moonball king in Russell Wilson as your starter going into the season, however long that lasts, that has to give Jalen Hyatt at least some opportunities to be able to get out there and show that he can be a weapon that stretches the field. And, you can be a receiver in this league that even if you don't develop to the point where you're getting, 80% of the snaps, you can be the guy that put him on the field and threaten the defense. And if you have a quarterback who's willing to throw that moon ball, which we know Russell Wilson, I think Russell Wilson's going to be 70 years old, sitting in a recliner. And if you ask him to go out to the practice field and throw a moon ball, he can. And I think that's kind of where Jalen Hyatt sets in. Now, you mentioned Darius Slayton. One of the reasons why Jalen Hyatt has yet to be able to have an impact is because of Darius Slayton. And I think last year the Giants anticipated Jalen Hyatt beating out Darius Slayton. And I don't think that Darius Slayton gave them the easy path that they had anticipated. And I think Slayton decided, this is my spot. And as much as I'll help the younger guys, I'm not giving this up. And there was never a point where the Giants could put Slayton on the bench and Hyatt on the field and sell it to their offense that they were going to give themselves a better chance to win. Slayton was the guy who needed to be out there. And I think, that is what has held Hyatt back as much as anything else. And look, signing Darius Slayton is as much a statement about Darius Slayton as it was about Hyatt not being able to develop, not being able to grab that job from Slayton. And again, I mentioned all the factors. It's not only their fault, but that's the NFL. People will just give you enough of a leash, and then it'll be, okay, well, we got to move on. We got to move this on. And I think that's kind of what Jalen Hyatt is facing. And he's also facing the idea that the Giants may end up signing Gabe Davis here over the next couple weeks. Coming back from his meniscus surgery, was released in Jacksonville, visited the Giants and the 49ers 2 weeks ago. A lot of people kind of rubber stamp that, the idea of, Joe Shane was heavily involved in the drafting of Gabe Davis in Buffalo, and then Gabe Davis emerged with Brian Daboll as the offensive coordinator. It's definitely going to be where Gabe Davis ends up. At this point, maybe Jalen Hyatt has a couple weeks here to kind of show, we don't need to bring in Gabe Davis right off the bat, or maybe the presence of Gabe Davis on a minimal contract kind of pushes Jalen Hyatt a little bit and gets him to the point where, he's out there and kind of wins a competition that he didn't win last year with Darius Slayton. So I'm not giving up on Jalen Hyatt just yet. I just haven't seen enough consistency in the growth in his game. And part of that is because you need opportunities in games. And the Giants could not last year put Slayton on the bench and say, you know what, Jalen, it's your time to kind of develop. I know a lot of people look at it and say, well, what's the big deal? You won 3 games, develop Hyatt. But this is a win now business for a lot of guys. And,
sure,
this regime needs to win on the field. And I'm not putting a number on it, but you can't spend the entire season of an NFL year and say we need to develop this wide receiver and see if he can do the job. So that's kind of where I'm at with Hyatt. I think he's still got a shot. People talk about trading Jalen Hyatt. What kind of market does Jalen Hyatt have? You need to make that determination at the end of the summer. If Jalen Hyatt has just not become a factor for this offense, then you look at it and say, okay, you may be in a deal where you're trading Jalen Hyatt for another player on another team that's not making a roster, but might be able to fit into what you want to do, a change of scenery situation. Maybe you flip picks then. You say Hyatt and a 6th for someone else and a 5th, that kind of thing. But right now, I think Jalen Hyatt still has an opportunity to be a part of this offense as wide receiver 4. And then injuries always happen.
Sure.
I mean, we've seen things happen. Guys get injured, and then all of a sudden you say, boy, I didn't see that coming. So I think the UT part of your family. Don't give up on Jalen Hyatt just yet.
All right.
But at this point, I'm certainly not drafting him in fantasy if that's the question that you're looking
Sure. No, that's some great information. I'm love that you touched base on the Slayton scenario there too. I think that kind of puts everything fully into perspective. But I do think that Russell Wilson scenario and tossing the pigskin downfield, I feel like, if there's a setup for him, to your point, this is the best one he's had to succeed, right? So
yeah, and if you hit a deep pass on to Jalen Hyatt, Russell Wilson at some point this summer, all of a sudden you're going to have that wave of emotion from a fan base that has essentially buried Jalen Hyatt now. Jalen Hyatt hasn't scored in the NFL in 2 seasons. He had 8 catches last season, which is unheard of. You'd look at it and say, well, he obviously had an injury or something. There has to be some reason why. And it's just he couldn't get on the field. And then they didn't have the quarterback to truly take advantage of, those plays. I mean, the downfall of Daniel Jones happened in Germany when they ran that flea flicker and they had 2 guys running wide open and Jones didn't pull the trigger and got sacked on a flea flicker near midfield. I mean, that's part of it. And I think it's on the coaching staff and it's on Hyatt to make that opportunity stick this year. So we'll see what happens, but I don't think it's over by any stretch, but I don't know where he is in terms of their front of mind saying, well, when we're putting together our offense, we need to have Hyatt out there on the field.
No, that's completely fair. That's some great insight. I really appreciate that one. Sticking with the youth, theme here, Theo Johnson seemed to be coming along pretty strong. He averaged, basically just over 7.5 or 5.5 targets in the month of November. Obviously gets injured in that Thanksgiving game. I was a huge fan of him coming out. I thought it was a good fit. I thought it was an obvious need for the Giants, a good fit. Do we think Theo can pick up where he left off in 2024 in this offense? And do we think these, let's call it the Russell Wilson edition, significantly helps him? What is your feel around Theo Johnson and his role this year?
Yeah, I think the Giants internally are certainly talking up Theo Johnson. I mean, when Russell Wilson signed here, I think he mentioned Theo Johnson more than any other player when he was on his first Zoom with us as the beat following his signing. I think the Giants like Theo Johnson a lot. I think Brian Daboll is a tight end guy at heart. I mean, all the talk about his quarterbacks. I mean, he was the tight end coach in New England when Gronkowski kind of hit his stride. So, that's something that Daboll, last year working with Theo Johnson, I reported last summer, just randomly Daboll would send down to the locker room to have one of the guys to send Theo Johnson up to his office. Theo Johnson would walk in and Daboll would say, sit down. I want to show you what we expect of you. And then he cuts on the tape and it's Rob Gronkowski highlights from when he was in New England, and Theo Johnson would kind of look at it and, okay, I got the message. I mean, they were hard on Daniel Bellinger when he came in here a couple of years ago, but in terms of Bellinger, being that blocker and kind of all around guy, Theo Johnson's ceiling is much higher in terms of an athlete. We know the Giants' connections at Penn State. I mean, you can go back even before Brian Daboll and we can look at Saquon, but then last year, they get Theo, and now this year, obviously, Abdul Carter. So the Giants, they like what they've seen at Penn State. And I think Theo Johnson, it's going to be interesting because Abdul Carter made the point in his combine interview with the Giants. If you haven't seen their video series, they did like a little documentary series, Theo Johnson, and then the next night was Jaxson Dart. And they included some of Abdul Carter in his combine interview. And they asked him about Theo, and they said, what would Theo Johnson say about you? And he talked about battles that they had in practice at Penn State. And Abdul Carter plays with an edge. I think the Giants are kind of expecting that similar edge with Theo Johnson. And we saw it in that Thanksgiving Day game against the Cowboys before he got hurt. I mean, some of those plays, dragging defenders. I mean, I think last year it was a big adjustment early on to kind of run some of those choice routes for Theo Johnson with Daniel Jones. There were several interceptions, misfires, where they just weren't on the same page. But when Theo Johnson kind of settled in to the position, and that was what was so frustrating about his injury, I think he really was staring at coming out of Thanksgiving that he was going to be a major factor for that offense down the stretch. So, yeah, to answer your question, I do think that after Malik Nabers, I think Theo Johnson is a weapon in this offense. I think Daboll loves his tight ends. He's got a deep tight end room that'll free Theo Johnson up to be really a part of this passing game. So, yeah, I'm all in on Theo Johnson. I was told that his injury was not as serious as first feared. It was not a Liz Frank injury. Just was a midfoot sprain, and that's a big difference. You put a tight end out with a Liz Frank, you're talking about a major recovery. From what I understand, Theo's been kind of back and running, so he'll be a guy that we want to watch this spring to see how much are they holding him back or how much are they putting him out there on the field and letting him kind of go run loose, because definitely a dimension in this offense that they need.
No, for sure. I hate to. I didn't want to bring it up, but I was like, does Theo kind of become that pseudo second receiving option? Assuming he can put it all together. I briefly talked about Robinson and his target share. I think he had 140 targets last year.
It was insane.
Insane. I personally would love to see some of that shift to Theo, and I think it sounds like he has the tools to, definitely absorb some of the, if not a lot of that. But no, it's again something to keep our eye on. To your point of how he ramps up, how fast he's out there, and man, you got me excited about the Giants' offense now.
That's like how do I manage that? How do I do that? I mean, again, we got to go back to the offensive line and talk about how they're performing. But, I think the Giants believe in a lot of the way. I think they're committed to, obviously, Malik Nabers. They've committed to Darius Slayton. I think they're committed. They like Wan'Dale Robinson. They think that a quarterback with a little bit more anticipation, and that's Russell Wilson, can get more for Wan'Dale in the run after catch. A lot of times Wan'Dale was catching a pass 7 yards, 1 yard short of the sticks and getting drilled by the safety because he's reaching back to try to catch a pass that's supposed to be here. A lot of Daboll's offense has been timing, and the timing's been off with the quarterbacks that they've had. I think they're really hoping that Russell Wilson and eventually Jaxson Dart can be that guy that kind of frees up some of these guys. The catch and run aspect has been invisible, even with Malik Nabers last year. A lot of his stuff was breaking tackles, trying to get around guys. There wasn't a lot of catch and run. And some of that was the accuracy of the quarterbacks. And I think, it affects what you can call and what your guys can do and put your guys into more physical situations. Nabers got beat up a lot. I mean, you're talking about a guy who there were at least 2 games that he ended up, having to get dragged off the field by medical personnel because one, he was knocked out on the catch on the sideline. I think it was the Dallas game, right, early on. And then the Washington game in Washington in week 2, he missed a play on the sideline that maybe gives the Giants a chance to pull off that upset. And then he gets drilled. So, long-winded. I do think that they have some weapons here. I think it's important to also note that the front office and the coaching staff is committed to the weapons that they have, right? They're not going to be looking to take these guys off the field. They're going to be looking to give them more opportunities. So that's why it's hard to say, they didn't draft anybody in the draft. They signed some rookie undrafted free agents, but they believe in the guys they have. So it's going to kind of be going down on the ship, right? They have to see what they can get out of these guys. And I think Daboll believes in these guys. It's just a matter of taking advantage of it. So that's why Theo and some of the receivers, I think they believe that they can still get more out of them than what they've gotten in the past.
No, that's some great insight there. And, just going to be exciting to see this kind of, carve its way through camp, see who's performing, see, how the offense even adjusts as players emerge, as schemes emerge with this, and the new additions to this team. Art, let's just talk briefly. What do you got working on? Where can people find your work? Give us anything that you want to highlight that you got going on.
Well, we got a daily presence, with the Giants. So first and foremost, you can find all my stuff at northjersey.com. If you're still a print believer, I work for the Record in North Jersey, Bergen Record, long time. I grew up. That's my childhood paper. My dad still gets it delivered. So it's print is certainly one of those weird things now, but still always mention it. Our podcast, obviously, we've kind of branched into video, so you can find it on the northjersey.com page on YouTube. And audio-wise, we're on every platform you can imagine as far as podcasts, just like you are. So that's kind of what we've got going on. We're there. Like I said, there's nothing like being in the building and trying to get the accurate information. And, this summer, I'm going to actually work on a project. I think I saw somebody do it a couple weeks ago, the kind of welcome to the NFL moment. And I'm going to try to work from the spring on down and see how many welcome to the NFL moments I can get from guys on the Giants to kind of set the stage for what's going to happen. This rookie class and last year's rookie class for the Giants are potentially the foundation. They hope that, in 3 years' time, they're looking back at 2024, 2025 as the foundational classes that kind of rebuilt and kind of re-energized this fan base. So look for that this summer. I think, the long-range view of what these two rookie classes mean to the franchise and mean to Joe Shane and Brian Daboll and what the Giants are trying to do after really losing their way as a franchise for the last decade or so. I think they're hoping to get back to a team that's competing in this division rather than being the team that everyone expects the other three, Eagles, Cowboys, and Commanders now, to beat up on. So it'll be interesting to see how they go. And obviously we will be there all along the way. Art _Stapleton at all social media, whether you prefer X and Twitter or Instagram, I'm out there too. So, that's what we got going on. So always love to be back on, and we'll come back on in the summer and try to see how smart we were or how silly we were when we met back at the start of OTAs.
No, we appreciate it, Art. Thank you so much. I know it means a ton to me. It means a ton to our listeners. And I just want to thank them all for listening today. And be sure to follow Art. Does incredible work. And we'll talk to you all soon.